whether we're live or not. So just keep an eye out.
It is live.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Greenlit Fest. Some of you have already been waiting. So I'm really glad to see that there are people who are coming early too. For those of you who joined us earlier, welcome back. And for those of you who are attending our conversation at GLF for the first time, so excited to have you join us. It's World Water Day today, so it might be worth pondering our relationship with water. I don't know if you've observed this, but in India, except perhaps the fisher folk and now adventure sports enthusiasts, most of us tend to passively engage with the seas or rivers that are close to us, unlike, say, Canadians, Spaniards, New Zealanders, Australians, and others. So, at some level, that's also to me what makes Ganga special. That since what might seem like time immemorial, we've quite actively engaged with it, even though it's not in the form of a sport, but in reverence and in hope. So, at today's conversation, it's going to be rather exciting to explore why that's so, what our engagement has meant even for Ganga's ecology, and how we can engage better to arrive at, say, a win win for her and for us. Just to share a personal anecdote, I'm from Bombay, and as a Bombay girl, apart from sea gazing, what's also been very close to me is the sound of water and water bodies. In fact, until some years ago, I also recorded and collected the music of water bodies wherever I traveled. So when I was putting together this conversation, I was very excited to have Rahul on as a musician. But it later struck me that we have many musicians in today's conversation. One is water, so is Ganga. And I've discovered Sudipta enjoys singing too. In fact, he's hiding his guitar somewhere. Sudipta, I've let out your secret. And Bidisha has a collection of music related to the Ganga, including folk songs. So it's only fitting that today's conversation is going to start with, a song from Rahul. And I'm sure all of you know Rahul Ram as Indian Ocean's bassist and a stand-up artist with Aisi Taisi Democracy, but maybe his hat and heart, of an environmentalist is lesser known. He did his PhD in environmental toxicology at Cornell University and then spent 5 years as an activist with Narmada Bachao Andolan. He's a strong believer in environmental education and spreading awareness about environmental issues through music. And he's going to tell you about this later, maybe, but he's already got some projects marrying the two of them, and it should be open to us soon. So, over to you, Rahul. I'm not going to take more time, and let's have you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pooja. People, what we're going to do is I'm going to sing just one line from one of my favorite songs about the Ganga. And then we are going to observe silence for a bit. Silence for a lot of things. Silence for the war in Ukraine, silence for the stories of the Ganga that we cannot tell, and silence for the hope for a better future for water, and especially the Ganga in this case, but for water and environment all across the world. Okay, so here we go. Just the one line. Ganga Marma Padda Marma Ganga Amar Ma Padda Marma Amar দুই চোখের দুই জলের ধারা মেঘনা যমুনা গঙ্গা আমার মা পদ্মা আমার মা You know why I think this is beautiful? Vidisha, thank you for the suggestion. It's also a measure of how we need to slow down and think, and how we need to incorporate all sorts of viewpoints when we talk about environmental issues. And it is my pleasure to introduce Bidisha Banerjee and Sudipta Sen. Bidisha Banerjee is trained in environmental science and climate change policy, which is amazing. You know, she spent almost 11 years along the Ganga, visiting it, visiting different points at different times, making notes and writing about it, and finally managed to come out with a book just as the pandemic hit in 2020. And the book is, I'll have her talk about it herself, but it's a very experiential, it's a very first hand account of the Ganga and of the people she talked to and of the reading she's done about the Ganga. Sudipta Sen, professor of history at UC Davis, University of California, Davis. Also, Delhi University, I think, at some point. I'm not sure.
No, mostly Calcutta.
Okay, okay, okay. And he's actually his area, region, or time of specialization is early British and late Mughal, if I may put it that way, history. Fascinating glimpses of which you will find in his book. I found out things about what the Europeans did in Bengal that I never even ever had heard of. Thank you. And what we're going to do is we're going to have both of them talk a little bit about their book first, and then we're going to move to. Incidentally, Sudipto spent 15 years writing this book. It is tour de force. You have to read it. Okay, and read both the books. Let them describe it for you, and then we shall, the three of us, have a conversation about what we think may be the way forward to bring the Ganga back. Well, I don't know. There's no going back in history, as a historian will tell you, but make the Ganga को फिर से अविरल बहने दो, जैसे हिंदी में कहते हैं. Let the Ganga flow free and pure again. So, Bidisha, if we may start with you, over to you.
Rahulji, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And Sudipta ji, it is an honor to share the stage with you. Your book is magisterial and unputdownable, which is something that, a lot of scholars and academics, they are not able to communicate or write for a general audience. So I was really blown away. And what an amazing song. It really gets to the heart of the love that has existed for the Ganga on the subcontinent. And it was beautiful, you sang Ganga Marma, Pada Marma. And I think sometimes these days we forget that the Ganga actually is a basin that encompasses all of South Asia, with tributaries and distributaries coming and going from outside of India, including from Tibet, from China, from Nepal, from Bangladesh. And my great-grand uncle was Manik Bandyopadhyay. He wrote the book Podda Nodhir Machi.
Oh my God.
So I really appreciated,
unbelievable.
And it was my pleasure to that my family supported me a lot, and my father traveled with me across the border to Bangladesh. Yeah.
So a little bit about your book, Bidisha.
So the book started off because I was part of the Indian Youth Climate Network, and prior to the climate talks in Copenhagen, we were traveling around India in solar electric cars and doing climate leadership trainings. And we had a solar powered rock band traveling with us. And we were connecting and celebrating that there are so many climate solutions, so to speak, in India already, including incredible abundance of solar and incredible ingenuity of common people. So as I learned about the melting of the Himalayan glaciers, how that was supposedly increasing, I had this desire to travel the river from source to sea and better understand how the entire watershed is changing and what we can learn about resilience. Um, and so I was just very lucky that, in little cracks of time, I was able to travel. And I think there are many connections with Sudipta ji's travels as well. So that was very nice to see. And I just, I'm left with a feeling of deep gratitude for the kindness of all of the people that I talked with, the incredible love for Ganga ji that still exists, this river that was once and still is in some cases a people's judiciary. There was a time when the holiness of the Ganga river water really governed our lives, particularly for those who were born into the Hindu community, with from like the moment of birth to the moment of death, right? At marriages, no alcohol was drunk. Ganga water was like the special thing that people had. And people would sometimes swear on the river. They would take oaths on the river instead of on a holy book or Bible. So that level of resonance has changed a lot, in part due to colonialism and kind of the legacy of disconnection between mind, body, and spirit. That was the legacy of colonialism. As people started to build canals on the river, as people started to treat the river as an exploitable natural resource, and as population grew and tube wells were sunk into the watershed, we've kind of arrived at the place where we are now, where Ganga is not flowing in a viral way, as you were saying. And so sometimes I think expanding our lens can help. Thinking about the cleanup of the Thames in the UK, which took 200 years or so as the country took the path from prior to industrialization to post-industrialization, gives me some hope. A lot of the people I connected with gave me hope, just in terms of their absolute grit and resilience. And at the same time, there's a time-sensitive matter that I wanted to make sure to speak about before turning the mic over to Sudipta ji, which is about the Ganga River dolphin, which I was very lucky to meet, and also lucky to meet the people who know that this mysterious creature very well. They're the scientists and fisher folk in Bhagalpur at the Vikramshila Dolphin Sanctuary there in Bihar. And this river dolphin is actually at the edge of extinction. There's a book by that same name by a scholar at Oxford who actually studied how the Yangtze river dolphin went extinct over 30 years, as conservationists and bureaucrats talked about what to do. Should they let the dolphin stay in the river? Should they try to somehow make it live outside of the river? And basically it went extinct. And my fear is that the same may happen to the Ganga river dolphin in our lifetimes. And I think that would be a shame, because it has been such a incredible keystone species. Like, along with that, there's so many other incredible species that still exist on the river. And Sudipta ji's book has beautiful pictures by Bidisha Sen, documenting some of that wildlife. And his book also has beautiful descriptions of wildlife we can no longer see along the river. And many of the communities that live so close to the river dolphin, they actually understand the river in ways that those of us who don't live that closely, there's no way that we wouldn't be able to survive amongst the, ebbs and flows and kind of wildness of the river. So it was a privilege to meet some of these people and learn from them. And my hope is that their perspectives and points of view are honored more fully. Unfortunately, the 2016 National Waterways Act is basically turning the rivers into a waterway, or it's an effort to try to turn the rivers into a canal. Dredging has already begun along the river. That narrows the waterway, so that makes it harder for dolphins and other species to live there. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak a little bit about this. Um, for anyone who's interested, there's a scientist named Nachiket Kelkar who has been very active about this issue and has written about it. Um, and you can check out his article or blog post called Digging Our River's Graves if you'd like to know more. And there's also people doing incredible conservation work that I spoke with.
Okay.
As well.
Thank you, Bidisha. I'm sure a lot of our viewers today do want to read and understand more about the Ganges dolphin, as it's called. And thank you so much for giving us a story of how your book happened. Sudipto, Professor Sen,
Sudipta,
over to
please.
you. Okay. Now, I just before he begins, I will say that Sudipto is a Bengali, and for Bengalis, the alphabet begins with A for orange. So he's Sudipto, he's not Sudipta. And funnily enough, you can have women in Bengal whose name is Sudipta, who write it the same way as Sudipto writes Sudipto. So over to you, Doctor.
I just wanted to make sure that there's another Sudipta Sen who are currently behind bars. So sometimes the Google, and I'm so far innocent until proven guilty. But in
Okay.
this case, in this case, I just wanted to say that it's a privilege to be part of this discussion. It's a privilege to be with Bidisha ji and in the company of a fellow Ganga enthusiast, traveler, and Ganga lover. And then Rahul ji, your inspiring music and your activism, um, which also continues to inspire. Uh, cannot say how important those pathways are right now in this hour. We are in an hour of extended crisis. The IPCC global warming report was just published, and the future of not just Ganga but the world doesn't look very good right now. But having said that, um, we should not despair, but we should actually renew our efforts at this hour. I will not be able to, in any way, summarize a book which spans 2,000 years in a few minutes. But the book was originally supposed to be a cultural history of the Ganga. But the more I delved into it, the more I traveled, much like Bidisha ji, from the deltas of the Sundarbans to the Gomu Glacier, and from where the glacial melts come, which is from around higher in Uttarakhand, the base of the Shivling Peak, Amarganga, Akashganga, all those places. I realized that one could not write a history of any river, cultural, social, without thinking about, in a broad sense, what the environment is and what ecology is, and how the river and us and all the creatures within it, around it, are part of what we can say is a struggle for habitation, right? To be able to inhabit this earth of ours. And the river is a very good site and example of that. But what has always intrigued me, and I'm sure if you read Bidishaji's book, it will come up there as well, is that how it is possible to have a river which is the central of the definition of an entire civilization and culture. And it's not just North India, it's South India. And in fact, the Ganga belongs to the world. I am like a pebble rolling on the bed of the Ganges, Jalaluddin Rumi. So how can something like that, so revered, uh, how many dying Hindus have had the last dribble of Ganga water on their lips, saying their final prayers over the years? Millions. How can such a body of water be so neglected and come to this sorry state where we are? And this is the paradox that I try to kind of answer in the book. Of course, it's very difficult to answer the paradox, but it's something that, as I said before to some of you, that this puzzle about why something so valuable can also be so exploited and so neglected. Maybe a solution is there somewhere in that what looks like an intractable problem. But I will just end my thoughts today with what going back to what Bidisha said about the dolphin. Is in the original depiction of the Ganga, as Ganga emerges as a deity, which is actually not just a Hindu deity, but a composite deity that comes from many sources. Comes from the animist traditions of the earth, comes through Buddhism, through Jainism, right? But that particular composite figure of the Ganga, you know. And by the way, what we understand, at least I understand historically, I'm a Hindu, as a Hindu, as the history of Hinduism is that so many rivers are fed into these traditions, right? So Hinduism, as I understand it, is has so many tributaries and so many distributaries, and so we have to keep that in mind. But this Gangaji's mascot, Vahana, is a creature known as the Makara. And the Makara is a composite, brilliant composite image of a creature which has scales, which has a long snout, much like a dolphin or a gharial, the Gangetic fish-eating alligator. It has a scale tail, and it's also part fish. So this avatar, or rather this particular form of the avatar, the Matsya avatar is also contained within it, because Gangaji is obviously also a liquefied form of Vishnu. That's another thing. But anyhow, the Makara creature sort of, in some, for me, sums up the beautiful description of the river as a living, breathing, biological, ecological, sentient entity, right? On whom Gangaji stands, as Jamuna ji stands on the Gangetic tortoise, and the tortoise is also very beautiful in the 5th century sculpture that you see in the National Museum, which you should take a look at. You can look at it online. So, with that thought, I just wanted to say that the book is called Ganga, The Many Pasts of an Indian River. And I know that we cannot go backwards in time. The river is flowing in the present and the future, but you cannot, the rivers take us back in time, because rivers also flow back in time. And it is not that river that is there today. Rivers change, river basins change morphologically, biologically, and the biome has changed. But we can take the river and go back and try to imagine what it has been for us, what it has been for my generation and many generations before, and to sort of sit and think a little bit here together with you about what would it mean today to restore the river? What does it mean to clean the Ganga? What How can we get back to a different way of thinking about the river and different way of living with the river, around the river? Um, and that those are sort of much bigger thoughts that I'm certainly not qualified, specialized to answer, but that's at the heart of my thoughts. And I hope that we don't go by the way of the Yellow River. What happened in Yellow River, Huanghe in China? It stopped 300 miles from its source one day in the 90s. Of course, they have tried to restore it. I mean, such a fate would be absolutely unthinkable for someone like me and millions of others like me and you, all of you. And so I'm hopeful that something can be done. And I just wanted to make sure that I present to my children, and I have two daughters, and to all the children of the world, and certainly of my subcontinent, the amazing, glorious, and absolutely fascinating past of that particular river, which has resonance in every corner of the culture of our country. So, with those thoughts, I close.
Thank you, Sudipta. I found it interesting that the song you were talking about, Bistinno Dupare, the song, you know, it's so interesting. It's what we are seeing today. If you people don't know the song, it's a song which essentially says that, originally about the Brahmaputra, then translated into a song about the Ganga, originally in Ahomia, then in Bengali, now in Hindi as well. And originally an English song about the Mississippi River. It says that
Yes.
the river flows and is silent to the sufferings of the people living along her banks. And I why do you stay silent? But today it's inverted. It's as if the people living on her banks are silent about her suffering, or they don't want to see it. So that song today actually has become, the more we have exploited nature in all its possible forms, the more it seems as if even though our lives are dependent on it, we somehow ignore it, or we can turn a blind eye to what we are doing so that we have better lives, right? And I think at this point, we can move from a description of the books to a discussion about what you guys think may be possible ways forward. देखिए गंगा जी तो हैं, as Bidisha amazingly pointed out. When I first read it, I was like, oh my God, that she met this Sadhu Mahantji. Bidisha, you tell the story, who essentially said that even if she doesn't flow, she is still there. So that is, I mean, come on. That means you're completely divorcing the spiritual from the environment or the physical. In the sense, the physical Ganga and the spiritual Ganga are being completely divorced. Now, this is possibly part of the reason why she is in the state she is in today, that in our heads as a collective society, we managed to divorce environment from the spiritual aspect of environment. Bidisha, that was an amazing, please tell us this.
Yes, and actually, to answer, I want to address a comment raised by Onu Jale, who is one of our guests today. She's actually featured in my book because she is someone who.
Is Anu here?
Yes. And she raised the question, why G? In Bengal, she's referred to as Ma Ganga. And
there's Anu. Yes, of course.
I highly recommend that everyone check out her book, Forest of Tigers, which was a great resource. It's about people in politics and the environment in the Sundarban area, where she has been living and researching for many, many years. And I think the reason why her question is important in terms of answering what you were asking about, Rahulji, is truly the river has different significance and people derive their identity from it in different ways all along the watershed. So G is certainly perhaps more of a North Indian formulation. And in the Sundarban area and also in parts of Bengal, there's actually really amazing stories of, I was thinking of Khwaja Khijr, who's a Sufi saint in Murshidabad. And there's a special religious festival along the river in honor of him. And in the Sundarban area, Onu beautifully talks about all of the different stories around Bon Bibi, the forest goddess who is held sacred by both Hindus and Muslims. And people still have a very immediate relationship with Bon Bibi. Where she can appear to them in their dreams and help them navigate the very tricky forest where tigers still roam, as you know very well, Sudipta. So there's a certain lived experience that researchers like Onu and the folks that she writes about have that I think makes the Ganga less theoretical and more of a lived entity or presence. For those of us who don't have the privilege of just living in very close daily contact with the river, as we're pondering this question that Sudipta ji raised around, what might it mean to restore the river? I really think that it might seem unreasonable to ask a whole society to rethink its master narratives, restructure its economy and politics, face partisan identity politics, and instead engage with deep individual and collective healing of anger, shame, despair, and fear in face of common suffering. Yet until we do so, the Ganga will not be clean. There's a huge trauma that happened to us as a people due to colonialism and partition. But prior to that, people identified as more connected to the specific part of the watershed that they were within. And partition happened. When partition happened, actually these watersheds were split in a way that was actually quite like it didn't make sense from the perspective of governance of the water bodies. So
That's what the opening song is about. Aki Akash, Aki Batash. Yeah.
yes, yes. And so, I was actually very inspired. My uncle sent me something. He said he forwarded this event, and he sent me something about the Asia Pacific Youth Coalition that is getting together to talk about climate and things like that. So as we come together and kind of allow the Ganga to expand our sense of our own identities, and perhaps find different types of groups to be part of, and perhaps just be in informal social networks and dialogues with people, including those who are displaced by climate change and by other types of development along the river. I think that gives me a lot of hope in terms of the way forward.
Okay. See, what happens is that the problem is so immense that an individual feels powerless. I think that's the general thing with climate change, but also with a problem as big as we are talking about today, entire river watershed. And when people who are of an environmental bent say things, it sounds to everybody else like, oh, this is so airy-fairy, I remember in the 70s when we started talking about environmental issues, people put us down as, they still say it, woolly-headed idealists who don't understand that development will be the only way forward. And by development, they meant raising standards of living. And unfortunately, yes, there is an environmental price, which nobody had figured out till then. But see, what I'm trying to get at is how do we move from a picture that is almost like Don Quixote tilting at windmills to a picture where we empower individuals to think that they can do something. I know it's a tough one. I'm throwing a googly at you, Sudipta, and asking you and then Bidisha to think about this and tell us what you think.
Well, there are a lot of things you can do with a Google. You can actually play it, or you can leave it, or you can get stumped. I think that you have just stumped me. I'm sorry about the cricketing metaphors, Bidisha. I was also going to tell Anu that sometimes if you travel in Bihar and further up north, everybody becomes a G. So even women can be G's, right? So, but her point is very well taken about the motherness of the river. Brahmaputra is a father rather than a mother. But anyhow, coming back to Rahul's question, you see, the thing that struck me most, and it's in the last sort of epilogue of my book, where Ganga actually beseeches Bhagirath, and she tells Bhagirath, "Why have you brought me here? Because millions and millions of people are going to be washing the most heinous sins in my waters. Who will cleanse me?" And Bhagirath's answer is fantastic. She says that, "Why do you think only sinful people will be bathing in your waters? The most pure men and women will be also bathing in your waters, and they will cleanse your waters." And this notion of a kind of ecological sin and punya cycle, I find fascinating. Because I remember I met another Mahant, Bidisha, a long time ago, Veerbhadra Mishra from the Sankat Mochan
Yes,
temple.
I met him as well.
Yeah. But this was long time ago. This was in the early 90s when I was teaching at Syracuse University. He came, and that's a different kind of a engagement of a Mahant with an ideal river, So there are metaphysics that are deeply spiritual and idealized, right? And there are metaphysics that are also part tactile, part everyday, part touching. It's part of dust, mud, and sand and water. And I think that we need a much more engaged metaphysics in our times. We need a much more engaged religion in our times. And And I think that the Ganga and the stories of the Ganga are in some ways great invitations to think differently. Think differently about what, where the so-called religious and the cultural and the ecological may come together, and be part of a broader definition of the river is after all part of the much larger hydrological cycle. And but the river is a great conduit, right?
Yeah.
And the conduit that is gives life in every sense of the word to all creatures, and including the human creature, right? And and that is the part of the tragedy. There is that uh, you know the contamination, E. coliform, the oxygen indexes, and the sewage treatment plants, and all those things that are happening to the river has ramifications way beyond the river itself, right? It has ramifications for the entire basin. It has ramifications for the falling aquifers. It has ramifications for arsenic coming out and the millions of tube wells that are being sunk. I think it's Anthony Acciavetti who's called it one of the most engineered spaces on the planet. That certain parts of that valley, in
The
terms of
Ganga
use.
water machine. Yeah.
That's right, the water machine, and the water machine is killing the water, and that's something that we need to also think about. Um, I don't know. There's no, and I, certainly it's. I should not, talk about this. I don't know, understand enough about what can be a humane engineering project, what can be a ecologically sensitive project that doesn't look at these problems from top down. But I understand one thing, is that if you do not bring together voices from the banks, and voices from the boats, and voices from the people who make a living, and from the dispossessed, then the solution cannot be for all, as it were. So I'm very suspicious of one size fits top down sort of solutions that are ready made, and um, and that is the
Okay.
reason why we are talking today about rivers having rights, legal rights. It's a very contentious issue. The Wanganui in New Zealand and parts of in Colombia and other places, people are thinking about a collective human ecological and floral faunal compact, which would give people or give places certain kinds of rights of survival. But this law is not in place right
Right.
now.
Almost was for Ganga. In
Yes, yes, yes.
court.
Yeah, but it was not actionable, and we need to open up the debate again, and to figure out how it can be made, at least possible in smaller in smaller places, in smaller
Yeah.
aspects. Yeah.
So, if I may, thank you, Sudipto. I want to jump in here and say that again, I think that unless all of us start talking about these issues, this is going to remain a bunch of environmentalists howling into the आंधी. Okay, और आंधी आपकी आवाज को ले जाएगा, बंद कर देगा. So, and I just think that we have to tell everybody we know and everybody who's listening, and guys, we just have to raise consciousness, because frankly, we are running out of time. Just as Bidisha said about the dolphin, we are running out of time. I think we are running out of time. Full stop. The global climate change crisis is accelerating day by day. And there are so many variables built into this extremely complex thing that when something reaches the tipping point that sends our entire climate into I think a lot of our viewers may not understand that the climate change also means that any farmer needs at least 3 months of guaranteed weather to raise a crop, okay, be it wheat or be it rice. What happens with the global climate crisis is that those 3 months are going to go away. And what is going to happen is that the individual farmer is not going to be able to guarantee success. But a corporate farmer with land in 10 different ecoregions may have 5 to 6 survive. Okay, so the corporates will still survive. What will happen to the millions and millions and millions of farmers and farming families when they are unable to raise a crop year after year after year for one reason or the other. As it is, farming is very, very difficult. So let us use this platform, the Green Literature Festival. What better than to say, ki, let everybody talk about this, spread the word and talk about it and do your little bit. My version of doing little bit is consume less. Don't buy things, things. Why do we need so many things? This is what happens, that people tell us ye kharido wo kharido, because the entire, this notion that unless you consume, the GDP of the country will not rise, right? मैं कहता हूं भाई थोड़ा बदलो. Now, Bhutan, for example, has this interesting gross national happiness. I don't know how that works, but I think we need to, while saying that yes, we need to change the way we look at the world, we also need to say that there are things you can do individually. And otherwise, the sense of powerlessness becomes too large, guys. It becomes too large. I'm sorry, 2.5 Bengalis here, so the Bengali phrase. What am I to do? So yes, what you are to do is to tell everybody about it, is to consume less individually, and then let us see where we can talk about the bigger policy. For example, Bidisha, you have things to add to what Sudipta said.
Sure.
The Namami Gange, the way the Kumbh Mela, for example, beautifully written in your book. Tell us about it.
Oh, I think you're talking about, I just mentioned the Kumbh Mela is actually very, very well organized, and the government increases the flow in the river, and so that leads to, very little incident of disease given how many people gather. So once every 12 years, something amazing and well organized happens. So my question is, why cannot that extend? And actually, one of the doctors I interviewed about that topic, he said he thought imagination is a skill that can be taught, and that's something I wanted to add to the mix. I also wanted to call out the work of Abhinash Mohanty. Dr. Abhinash Mohanty, I mentioned him in my book as well. And he works with the Center for Energy, Environment and Water. And he's been writing and publishing a lot about the IPCC reports because he's actually a member of the IPCC. So you can follow his work, and that for those of you who are interested in policy at that level, there's a lot you can do just by becoming more engaged with some of the folks that I've mentioned in the book. It'll take efforts from all of us, and I, for one, having looked at kind of social metabolism and things like that, I think that not consuming less is a great start, because that's how we reclaim our attention from all of these little pop-ups that are constantly trying to, divert our attention. And I think it's only the first step, because really coming together in groups to transition away from fossil fuels is really the great challenge of our lifetime. And I didn't even mention the proposed coal power plants that are proposed to be built along the river. These are all topics that we can inform ourselves about. And
Bidisha, I think you've frozen.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just taking a moment to think what else can be said.
I was just going to add one thought to what Bidisha said. One of the things that when I think about what the river might have been like, and I was sort of trying to imagine it while I'm writing about it, let's say in the near time of the Mughals, or even before that, during the time of the great dynasties of Bengal, any time in the past, one thing always struck me. The idea of polymerization. Polymers had not been invented. There was not a single piece of plastic anywhere, because that technology was not known. Or along the sides and roads of Ganga, there was no vulcanization, which is that one molecule of sulfur that you put into rubber to make the vulcanized tire, which never is indestructible and is a permanent scar on the face of the planet. Those things were not there. And so one of the things that I sort of think about is amazing amount of plastic entering that river. And in fact, I think the latest National Geographic will have that very depressing article on plastics on the Ganga, which just if you wanted to pick that up at some point. But I want to say that as Rahul was just pointing out, we forget that when we vote in the ballot box, that's not the only way we exercise our choice. We exercise our choice every day, every single moment as consumers. And it's a very empowering thing, you know. Um, uh, and, you know, if you buy less plastic, or I mean, I would like to bring back the terracotta, which, you know, is biodegradable. Terracotta bottles of water, you know, which you manufacture, you drink, and you dispose, and it goes back to clay. Or if we can sort of get out of our habit of dredging, you know, millions of tons of sand from the riverbanks for house construction, you know, and other things that we do, you know, we can change some of our raise awareness about some of our consuming consumption habits. You know, maybe not a small but a big change can happen. It certainly has happened in other parts of the world. But
Sudipta,
that
you were telling me about going to the Namami Gange and how it was quite an interesting experience.
Oh
You'd gone to
yes,
the.
yes, I gave a talk. I was invited by Rajiv Ranjan Mishra, the director, to go and talk, and I thought that I would be walking into a lot of people and talking to people who might have very different views from me. But I was actually struck by the fact that many of the people on the Nawami Gange were quite aware of all many of the things that we are talking about today, and there was a very interesting discussion. Of course, you know, this was before COVID, and the COVID has also shown, you know, how the river is unable to, in some ways, you know, bring back or sustain the kind of things that, you know, the body showing up, etc. But you know, we won't go into that. But what I was struck by was, but the fact was that, you know, they were really talking about a comprehensive sort of project. 200. It is, after all, what is. I have a figure right here. It's 2,000 crores of rupees that have been sort of allotted or for this. And you know, they were open to thinking about what it would mean to bring back certain habitats. Instead of one species, if you think about bringing back a particular habitat, that actually affects a much larger sort of footprint of the biome. It affects a much larger footprint of both humans and flora and fauna. And so I hope that conversation keeps happening, because I think it's going to take everything. It is going to take state projects. State projects have to be pushed and intervened and sometimes resisted from local communities. Local communities have to be also responsive to policy making. I mean, it has to be a model of inflows and outflows, and not model meaning like sitting in an office and making a model, but actually in action. And someone like me, I will be also there, or others like me, your traveling history companion, who would remind you that once upon a time, most of the pilgrimages on the river were based on ideas of migration of birds. Some of the greatest pilgrimages in Kanauj, Hansa Prapatana, where the swans alight from across Siberia, places like that. And it's really part of our history and part of our culture. Um, if you look at the Granth Sahib and look at Guru Nanak's writings about the migratory birds, you can see that too in Sikhism. So we have sort of put things in different boxes. We've put birds and animals in one box, and gods and makaras in another box, and rivers in another box. And I think that the boxes are just some things that we make up, and we need to open the boxes and let all the creatures run together. That would be my thought.
Yes, a beautiful world if we can reach it. And I a little bit more, Bidisha, on how during the
Just
Kumbh Mela, the.
Rahul,
Sorry.
sorry to interrupt you. Just a moment. So, what's exciting is that we have comments ringing in the in both the chats. Somehow, some of our audience members have also managed to be on StreamYard. So they put some comments in the chat section, and there are comments in the comment section with some questions. So I think a couple of them are also related to something spoken. Rahul, you might want to take them. So just came to
I
inform
can't,
you.
I can't, I can't see them.
Um, are you zoomed in? If you zoom out, then on the comment right
There
hand
is
side,
no individual in India. Few think individually. My question is with respect to Ganga. Legal rights is still being considered.
no, no,
Meanwhile,
no.
what small ones are going to.
You have to go further up. The question is a little ahead.
Well, Pooja, do you want to just read the questions to us? That would make it easier.
Sure, I could do that if
Yeah,
that's
go ahead.
better.
Yeah,
Sure.
the ones that are, yeah.
So I think what Rishi has said, Rishi Agarwal, is basically a comment. Rahulji, absolutely, that divorce is a marked phenomenon of Hindus and the reason for the state of the Ganga, the sight of families and especially women at Yamuna on Chhat Puja is a vivid insight. He's
In
also,
the with the surrounded by foam. Yes, I know what
yeah.
he's talking.
And
Yes.
he also mentions that it reflects the political leadership, and it's not just a colonial mindset, which has led to the break in mind, body and soul. Solutions also are there, but mindset is not. The actual question is from Parul. It says, in prehistorical times and later, how was the ecology different? Considering you've studied it, and how did previous empires impact it? When did we start seeing most impact? So she's gone on to clarify she's only talking about the Ganga. So, yes.
Oh, so I will tell her that you have to read Sudipta's book. In fact, so what, if I may, Sudipta, encapsulate that for years, even as late as the British, it was very difficult to travel along the Ganga because there was forest and there was wildlife and there were robbers and there was thickets that you had to cut through. So this entire destruction of almost all the forests along the banks of the river has taken place in the last 200 or so years, I would say. Yes, it's been increasing. It started off with perhaps the slave dynasty. Is that Todarmal and his
I mean,
Iltutmish?
the best way to imagine this is to think about the forest canopy, and if you took a bird's eye view of history and just imagine in this journey, and you speeded up time immensely, you can see tiny little brown
All
lines, river banks, and mostly green, and little bits of agriculture and scrub and forest. And then as you travel close towards the later Mughal period, suddenly more gaps appear in terms of settled agriculture, and then there's a absolute takeoff, from the period of the sort of early to mid 19th century, and then there's no turning back, and then suddenly everything, the green just disappears. Uh,
yes, and I think to ascribe that only to the colonials is
no, it's a cumulative
no.
process. The
Yeah.
the the British, important as they are only part of one of the nine chapters of my book. With due respect to the British Empire, uh, but but on the other hand, we know, as you said, when farmers don't have those 3 months, what happened in Bengal in the 1770-71. My one of my next book is actually an ecological history of the Great Bengal, the Forgotten Famine, and that one third possibly of the lower Gangetic Valley perished in that famine. Especially in Bengal, higher the rate than the Black Death. So of course, without ascribing blame to this or that, or to a few bad actors, and there are many bad actors. Uh, think about the balance, and think about the delicate fulcrum on which we are. My colleague Sunil Amrit's book on the history of climate, of water management and climate, is a very good reminder of if you don't understand the behavior of the seasons, and the behavior of the clouds and the rains. In Bengal, we have Bidisha Khonar Bachon, the great Bengali woman seer, whose rhymes we still have. And then, of course, in southern India, you have Tirukural by Tiruvalluvar, who talks about the importance of banks and waters. I mean, all over the subcontinent, there is this amazing, sort of encyclopedia of local knowledge about the way the rivers behave and the way the clouds and rainfall behaves. It's just in front of us. But that's why we need to think a little bit more about this notion of what was once and how things have. And it's not just a story about India, right? It's a story of our planet in many ways.
Yes, and I also think that nowadays there's a lot of talk about sanskar,
Yeah.
and I think the ecological part of the sanskar has completely gone out the window. We're only look at sanskar in terms of ritual or clothes or food. We are not talking about sanskar in terms of how nature and humans used to live together. And I think that also needs to be explored by people.
Yeah.
And if like we've said, you cannot go back, but you can learn from the past, which a historian and historian. I hate that an historian. Ah, why an historian? Anyway, so
But
अंग्रेज ना अंग्रेज अंग्रेज में लॉजिक ना है.
So, Rahul, what you said about that, I think there's another question quite related to it in a sense. In fact, I want to add your point to that. So, it says that, while legal rights are being considered, what small solutions have worked here and elsewhere, and what might be unique to Ganga's case. And I think Sanskar could be one point to bring back because it was something that, was there in terms of sacred groves, not in terms of river ecology, but we've had that, in certain parts of India. So maybe, Bidisha, this question was for you, but obviously, free for all of you also to add to it. So,
Sure, I'll just take a minute to try to respond. Legally, it was very interesting to look at the work of the Georgetown-based economist Shireen Joshi, who looked at the impact of the environmental legislation passed in Kanpur to improve the water quality there and control the tannery waste. It's very interesting because after doing a multi-year study, she and her team concluded that the environmental laws advocated for by MC Mehta in the 80s actually did have a positive, measurably positive impact, on quality of life, health, quality of water. And what was very interesting is talking to activists on the ground, Rakesh Jaiswal, he had a different perspective because from his perspective, it seemed like things had continued to get very polluted and more polluted. So I wanted to share that because there may be some lawyers in the audience as well who might be feeling a little bit like we would like to know how to help out, but sometimes the legal structure seems so implacable or intractable that it can be hard to work with it. And so I just wanted to share this as one hopeful story, where even if on the ground the impact is not immediately visible, if you study it over time, you can see that laws can have a positive impact. There are so many other small things that have been working, whether it is restored wetlands, bioswales, which are human-made pathways for draining and filtering water. I mean, in Kolkata, the East Kolkata wetlands is an amazing example where people are actually recycling human waste and turning it into food, and wildlife is thriving. Although that area has always been under some duress. There's Valli Bindana's film Surya Ganga, which I would recommend. There are composting toilets all over the place that could be scaled up more. Sudipta ji mentioned Veerbhadra Mishra, the priest hydrologist who has now passed away. He was considered a hero of the environment for his commitment to the Ganga. He had actually come up with this algae-fueled wastewater treatment plant, which was highly approved by all kinds of experts throughout the world. However, I talked to B.B. Tripathi, who's one of the kind of power players in kind of Varanasi, about why that algae-fueled wastewater plant never got built, and that was because of different types of local politics. There was my takeaway. So the solutions have been floated for decades. I think that there's something deeper about maybe human nature, how we relate to each other, that is worth examining. Maybe also some element of secular spirituality, by which I mean just a sense of meaning, purpose, each individual getting really clear about their motivations and what will inspire them to continue to contribute. We have covered such a broad range of topics and potential ways that people can get involved. And I think that's because there's so many different types of people. Some of us will be more drawn to the kind of green engineering and infrastructure projects. Some of us will be more drawn to the policy side. Some of us will be drawn more to just being with our grief and trauma around all that is passing and wanting to slow down and include some of those contemplative practices that are also a big legacy of the Ganga for those of us from all different traditions. So I believe that it's all needed, and I'm actually very hopeful to hear more as the years go on from people about how our conversation has landed for them and what they took away from it.
Okay, that sounds like a very nice way to conclude, actually. So I want to request Sudipta. Sudipta, grab that guitar, man. Come on. Pick it up. Pick it up. Pick it up.
Okay.
Come on. Go ahead. Go for it.
Hold on. We'll sing together.
Bidisha, you also sing, I believe.
I will sing the Ahomya, just the 4 lines of the Ahomya, and then
Yes.
we'll move. Bistirno parore, ahondo janore, hahakar hunyo, nihobde nirabe, budhalui tumi, budhalui buakyo.
দীর্ঘ অসংখ্য মানুষের হাহাকার শুনে
নীরবে ও গঙ্গা তুমি
ও গঙ্গা
বইছো কেন?
Okay, Sudipta, you should realize, as I knew a long time back, it's not possible for 2 people to sing because there is always a lag.
It's okay.
But I think we began with the song. We should end with the song. And thank you, everybody. And thank you, Bidisha. And thank you, Sudipta. And thank you, Rahul. And thank you, Pooja. And thank you, Green Literature Festival. And I think we actually, we 3 can continue talking for hours. But I think it's early in the morning for you. Yes. And it's kind of midnight, not midnight. It's a nice time.
Well, all these people tomorrow can start cleaning the Ganga all together, so we can all. But no, right. But jokes aside, thank you so much, Rahul. Thank you, Bidisha, and thank you, Pooja, for bringing us together.
Not so soon. You'll have to
one doesn't feel
at least
so
tell
alone.
us what that song meant, so that thank you. So that we can thank you back too.
Well, very quickly,
for all the non-Bengalis among us.
There's an Ahomya song which was sung by Bhupen Hazarika, but I'm forgetting the original composer. I'll let you know. Why are you, old river? Why are you flowing? With all the people suffering on your sides. And as Rahul said, it originally comes from Old Man River, which is goes back to. That song.
It's a song in English, and it's in theory it's in a musical actually, made ironically by 2 white people.
Right.
And the song is sung in the voice of a person who is working on the banks of the river.
Right. It was
and then the song became famous because Paul Robson, the very famous civil rights.
Paul Robson, famous baritone.
Paul Robson used to sing it. Bhupenda heard it from Paul Robson. Bhupenda then made it into a Ahomya song about the Brahmaputra. Yes. And then he translated it into Bengali, and then somebody translated it into Hindi. And see, this is how a song can travel in ways that the 2 original guys who wrote the song may never have intended. It's like a rivulet that became the Ganga. That rivulet did not know where it was going to go, but it flowed, and somebody sang it here and somebody sang it there. This song essentially.
But this is what rivers do. Rivers don't listen to us. One part of the Ganga branches off and meets with the Brahmaputra and becomes the Padda. And Bidisha's, the descendant of the famous author of the Fisherman of the Padda. Padma Nadir Majhi, which is that amazing river. And so it's a beautiful way of thinking about how all waterways are connected. And so our thinking must be connected.
And the other song, the song I began with, Ganga Amar Ma, so simple. Podda.
Yes.
Podda is what the Bengalis call the Padma. Okay.
Yeah.
आप लोग पद्मा कहते हो, हम लोग पद्दा कहते हैं. Meghna Jamuna are two distributaries actually of the Podda, actually of Ganga. And I used to, as a child, wonder कि जमुना जी तो मेरे घर के पीछे बह रही है, ये कैसे आ गया उसमें? I used to wonder because I was thinking of Delhi wala Jamuna ji, and it turns out there is a Jamuna river that flows. So the two streams of water from my eyes are the Meghna Jamuna.
That's right.
So Ganga is my river, Padma is my river. So
and
that
then
is what
think
he
of
says.
how many rivers in all over India have the name Ganga in it.
Yeah.
And every rivulet from the glaciers are all Gangas. And we in Hindi we call the the Milky Way Akash Ganga. So the Ganga is not a river; it is all rivers.
Yes.
And so if you save one, you save everything. I mean, so this is the sort of hopeful the way I sometimes you dream like that. Dreams are
Learning how to save one will teach you how to save the others. I think
that's right. That's what I'm thinking. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
yeah. Also, to continue that song, it goes on to say, I think when I look at it now, it's a song about how Bengal got split. Because he says the same sky, the same land, the same thoughts, the same fears. We don't care which bank we are on. We are the one. Aki Jontona, our suffering is the same. So this is the song. It's not been written by Bhupenda. It's been written by a Bengali man, but sung beautifully and made popular by him. So, these thoughts are there. Like I was telling Bidisha that he's singing about two parts of Bengal still having the same heart even after partition. And this is the way we think, like we said in the beginning, a watershed, different countries, actually the same river. And everybody's views are important. Like, for example, the Faraka Barrage stands out as something that India did to try and revive the water channel south of Calcutta, and ended up being quite disastrous for both Indians and Bangladeshis, actually, quite interestingly. So different intervention, different stories, different people. I hope you took away a lot from this, and we'll carry the love for environment and environmental issues ahead in your lives. Pooja,
Yes.
over to you.
Well, I think what I'm going to do is, like the Milky Way, just milk out a little more from all of you, which is, and this is that for whoever's watching today, let's put together, because all of you have music in your hearts, and some of you can sing too. So give us a list. You can give me a list
Okay,
of all the songs
everything
on
came
Ganga,
back. Everything went away and everything came back.
all the songs on Ganga that you're really fond of. And I'd love to put it out to whoever's attending, because they've clearly liked it. Deepak Gupta has said it was a beautiful experience listening to you all. And, so everyone's kind of, there's a question about classical art practices and, how that is impacting nature. So I think there's a lot with this. So let's leave them with some art, with some music. So it can't happen right away, maybe, but you could send me, whatever you think people should listen, and we'll put it out for people to listen more about the Ganga, more about rivers, and help them connect more.
Bidisha has a collection. Come on.
Yeah.
She's the lady.
Yes.
Yes, the bowel music that I heard in Bangladesh by Anushe Ayadil and others was absolutely heart-melting. And I'd love for all of us to contribute to a playlist. That's a great idea. And I also wanted to say there's a link in my bio for the first two people who want to talk to me for about 30 minutes about what they can do to learn more about these topics. I would be happy to connect. So
That's great.
Okay, I also have a suggestion. I think everybody who listened to us and is listening to us and was here should send in their song. Why just us? Everybody. Send in your songs about water. Send in your songs about the river. Send in your songs about the ocean. Let us try and make a collection of these things, which then the Greenlit Festival can say, hey, we have a bunch of stuff. You can listen.
All right. Well, that's a
Let
great
everything
improvisation. Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Fine. So it's going to be a give and take, as Rahul said, and that's how nature works too. You can't
Yes.
only take, you must give back too. So we're going to give you songs, and we want some songs back from all of you. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
নমস্কার আড়াইটে বাঙালি আপনাদের নমস্কার বলছেন হ্যাঁ
Uh,
ঢাই
it's,
आप नमस्कार कह रहे हैं
namaskar. So Pooja, are we now closing the session?
Yes, we are. Yes,
Yeah.
we
Okay.
are.
Okay.
Yes. Ganesh
Can
will
we
do the honors for us.
can we remain for a second? I just wanted to say, or can
So we will have
Okay.
to end this. But
okay,
I
okay.
mean, in the sense, do you want to stay with the audience?
No. What
No.
I'm saying is, just wanted to say a
Yes,
couple of
yes.
things to
So
Disha and
I will
Rahul.
arrange for that. Give me 2 seconds, but we'll
Sure.
have to leave from here.
I just wanted to thank everybody who logged in today, and thank you for listening to us and carry this forward. And let 1,000 conversations bloom. That's the beginning.
Absolutely. Deep gratitude to all. And thank you to
Gratitude. Yes,
Rahulji for hosting and Pooja for your incredible job with bringing it.
absolutely. And we end with the puja.
Oh gosh. All right. Thank
मैं
you.
दिल्ली से मैं कह जाई बल्ले बल्ले I feel there is a missing Punjabi ingredient to all this and I shall bring that in.
The land of the 5 rivers.
Punjab हाँ बिल्कुल
Punjab.
Hmm?